Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mitya, for this intro. And again, thank you for invitation here specifically to Milan Dimkic. And I would just remind you that it's my second appearance in this conference. I was here 2014, 2 years ago. That time I've tried to share with you my experiences from my early incarnation when I was dealing with the EU accession process of Slovakia towards the European Union, and in that time you were at the beginning of your negotiation, and I tried to share with you some experiences from that period. Now my role is rather difficult because I am the only barrier before you get to your lunch. So that's my first difficulties. But on the other hand, my role is rather easy because some of the information I want to share with you were already provided by Professor Sontag-Lee or by Professor Dimkic. So I will skip that pieces just to don't let you wait too long for lunch. Actually, as I said, this time I would like to share with you the successful story of the ICPDR of the last 15 years, how this international cooperation really bring some benefits to transitional countries, because don't forget, at the start of the Danube cooperation, there were only two non-transitional countries in the Danube family, Austria and Germany, and all others, including Serbia at that time, it was former Yugoslavia, and Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, everybody were in the beginning of the transition. But this transition, international cooperation at the regional level, provided some challenges for those countries, let's put it this way, and the challenges are still there, but also provided some opportunities. So in my talk through our system, how do we work, I will give you some examples how transitional countries have reacted to those challenges or how they were utilizing or riding on those opportunities. I don't need to introduce the Danube River Basin to you. You are all well educated about that, about the length of the river, about the importance for all sectors, about, let's say, these cultural, environmental, and historical features of that. What is important for our basin, which is, I think, a unique situation in comparison with other river basins in Europe, is the large diversity. Because it's not only the hydrological diversity that is starting as a mountain river, then goes through Hungarian plains and then ending up in a huge delta, going through large cities like your capital Belgrade. But more importantly, there is a big environmental diversity, because you cannot compare situation in Alpines with delta. There is also a big cultural and historical diversity, because unfortunately for political reasons, between 1948 and 1989, two parts of the basin developed under different political economical systems. But also it has some cultural diversity, but probably for the problems and issues with regard to the transitioning economy, how to transform their water sector in a sustainable way, the biggest challenge is the economic diversity. And you are aware of the fact that Austria, Germany are the countries with the GDP per capita between 30 and 40,000 US dollars per year, whereas in Moldova, Ukraine, we have figures around 1,000 US dollars. So this imbalance provided also challenges for the cooperation at this level. I'm going to speak about the hydrographic characteristics of the basin. I would like to remind you that if you look at the position of the Danube River Basin in the Europe, this was very important over centuries and maybe also millennia, because the Danube made the border of the former Roman Empire in the northern part. So if you look at the old Roman map, you see below the Danube was the Roman Empire. Above on the north there was a Centers Hitsun Leones. The lions live here, so uncharted, unknown territory. But over the centuries, the Danube River Basin went through a lot of developments in order that nations should cooperate on the use of the water for navigation, flood protection, fisheries, agriculture uses. But also, according to history, and Belgrade is a very good, let's say, example for it, it was a hotbed for conflicts, because this area really witnessed and suffered a lot of armed conflicts over last, let's say, hundreds of years. But what is also very important for transboundary cooperation in our basin, it is the fact that this was the first international law regulated river in the world. We are coming back to the Ottoman era, where the first treaty between Russia and Habsburgs and Ottoman allow to use the river for navigation purposes, and that was changed several times, which ended up in this 1948 signature of the Belgrade Convention on Navigation, where the Navigation Committee is now sitting in Budapest regulating this stuff. So really it's a very intense and diverse basin. Important for all of us was the year 1990, where the transition really started. And I would say the transition started partly at the regional level, because we start to negotiate the Danube Protection Convention, but also at national level, which has a big impact on water management in all Danube countries. Because the political system changed and the economic system changed. Market economy was in privatization. A lot of things, good and bad, let's say, challenged our water management. But as I said, the problem of the basin was that the lower part, the western or upper basin, was in some sort of sustainable development with regard to pollution control. But on the other hand, the lower part, I call East of Vienna, were facing all this environmental pollution, environmental degradation problem. So this was which led the Danube countries that time and the national government to a very clear decision. We cannot cope with the problems on national level. We have to work jointly on that. And that gives the base for the Danube River Protection Convention, which I have now honor to represent here, the Secretariat. But if you look at the key objectives of this convention, that it's really looking at all the challenges of the water sector in the basin, because we simply cannot get to a sustainable water resource management, which was introduced by Professor Sontag-Lee and also partly by Professor Dimkic, what is needed in the countries without looking at all these four objectives. What was actually important in that period of time, that, as we said, this transboundary cooperation provides challenges, but also opportunities. And I will speak about the opportunities in this respect, because, as I said, only 2 countries at the time of the signing of the convention were EU member states. Actually, one was member and Austria was on its way. But when the convention entered into the force, there's only 2 countries. But this was the implementation of the convention started during the process of a so-called EU Big Bang, where 10 European countries were entering or negotiating the access to the membership to the European Union, out of which were 6 in the new countries. So ICPDR work, that our cooperation were challenged by the same factors as Serbia is being challenged now, to develop the plan and to find a way how to change the legislation system, how to change the institutional system, how to find a financial framework for the development of the water sector. So the lessons these countries learned were really valuable, and I think that Serbia has the opportunity to use it and is using it. But of course it's not to overcome the national challenges, but to learn even from the mistakes from others. If I look at the contracting parties, now we have 9 EU member states and 5 non-member states, non-EU member states. These 5 of non-EU member states, each of them is more or less in some relation with the European Union. Serbia is a candidate, and others have sign associated treaty. So and ICPDR was the platform where all these non-member countries make a political commitment to start to implement and change their national policies and regulation towards the EU legislation. But here, let me make one quote of the benefits of the transition countries being members of the ICPDR. There was, 2 years ago, European strategy for the Danube region, this macroeconomic strategy, where also non-member countries are part of, was an annual forum in Vienna 2 years ago. And that time we also celebrated 20 years of the ICPDR. So we invited the head of the delegation from Croatia, because it was Croatia presidency, to make let's say, adoration speech. And he said in his speech that being, I quote, contracting parties to ICPDR feels like being a member of European Union for last 10 years. So that's really, as it was a practical and public political acknowledgement of the work which helps the countries in their transition towards a new style, new policies and regulation towards the requirement of the EU. This is the famous structure of how do we work. I don't want to repeat this, it's well known. I want to make a comment here that for all the new countries, in particular non-member states, the structure of these expert groups, where the people from the national institutions, like the Jaroslav Černý Institute or the ministry, sometimes from academia, but mainly from governmental institutions and water directorates, are participating in cooperation, we have two benefits. The country, the basin, has a benefit that whatever new policies, regulations are being developed and then adopted at the political level, ICPDR, are grounded. These are designed and proposed by the people who are responsible for those issues at the national level. So when it's come to execution, they know what they're supposed to do. On the other hand, we have still also diversity of the capacities, and we've seen that, for example, in some Danube countries, the lack of engineers or hydraulic engineers or people understanding water issues is not sufficient. So in that respect, the people can learn from the neighbors, for example, who are member states longer, who has a higher capacity. So this is also, it's a laboratory for learning, and we have to be really thankful to the countries that they are sending their best experts, including Serbia, to these dialogues and discussions. So everybody is learning from everybody. So it's, again, some sort of additional external source of expertise and education. Very quickly, I think this we can learn one from another how this progress has been made, because the first river basin management plan has been already implemented with, let's say, mixed success. Now ICPDR adopted last year the second river basin management plan and first flood basin management plan, but through this transboundary cooperation, the Danube nations were able to make progress in flood protection, in improving environmental conditions, for example, through the fish passes. Also, the scientific knowledge has been improved. JDS3 was already mentioned, but also the tremendous investment in water pollution control, in particular in new EU member states. But also rehabilitation of, for example, of the floodplains and reconnection of the main river with oxbows and branches. So ICPDR has to be proud of something, but on the other hand, this was also helpful to countries to learn from each other how to make a progress. Just over the last 10 years, during the implementation of river management plan, to show that some of these progress is really measurable. It's not just saying we are better, we do this and this. Really, the reduction of organic emissions, of rehabilitated wetlands and floodplains, fish migration aids constructed. For example, this number represents only those fish migration aids which were constructed on those rivers which are part of the river basins larger than 4,000 square kilometers, because that's the level of the interest of the ICPDR. But also the nitrogen and phosphorus emissions help to improve the environmental situation of the entire basin. Very important is to mention that ICPDR as an institution doesn't mess up with the national business. That's very important, that there is no ambition and there is also no authorization for ICPDR to deal with the national issues. That's the reason why agreements since year 2000, when we start to implement Water Framework Directive, ICPDR deals only with this roof level. So there is agreed what are the issues of the transboundary importance, where activity in one country influence, for example, the status of the water in another country, that we have to work together. So this River Basin Management Plan or Flood Risk Management Plan, which we developed last year, are dealing only with those issues of transboundary importance. So, as we said, our new River Basin Management Plan provided a roadmap to cleaner, healthier and safer waters by 2021. Actually, Milan Dimkic has already informed you about the progress we did about the cut pollution from the settlements, because 15 years ago the biggest problem was the organic pollution from the settlements. So you have seen already these maps, getting from red to blue, how the situation is improving. Unfortunately for Serbia, the biggest challenge for the period until for the future is in this part of the world, but this is really something where I think that the approach is introduced in your strategy, that long-term planning and long-term financing at the national level is needed. But in this respect, I would still encourage your water negotiators team to bring all the economic arguments to the table with European Commission on the feasibility of those investments. Because, as I noted down, that the overall need for compliance in water sector is 8 billion euro, out of which 5 billion is for drink supply and sanitation system.
Plus 2 for other purposes.
Plus 2. So, anyway, 8, 5, 7, this is still, as native people used to say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, many. So it's too much. It's too much for the country of a size with the in-depthness you show. But I think what was one of the, and I think I'm repeating myself 2 years ago, it was the way how certain countries, including my home country at the time, were able to put economic arguments on the table, what is feasible with regard to the transitional period. And this is really the key for your future negotiations. So I'm moving forward. Of course, this situation about the ecosystem services, the environmental health of the basin is, as Mr. Seiler already pointed out, is a big challenge for countries in transition, because 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 150 years ago, the society has a different let's say, recognition and different view on these issues. But still, I think it's important in combination with the necessary investment in the water sector infrastructure to look at some of the measures, like, for example, fish passes or rehabilitation of floodplains, to move forward the let's say the overall management of the river, of the basin. I don't need to speak much about this river basin flood risk management plan, but what is important that we now know, whether it's climate change or changing of pattern whatsoever, we are subject the basin for much more severe flood. This is the security. Uncertainty is how does it relate with the climate change, but this, as we said, we cannot stop thinking and preparing ourselves for the future floods. So in that respect, I think the coordination role of ICPDR, helping countries working with the countries on understanding or designing the area where the flood hazard is and thinking of the flood scenarios is important, because this type of joint planning brings stronger arguments for you in national decision-making process in the necessary investment. So I think the coordinated approach from Germany down to Romania on understanding the risk of the floods and the floods hazard is strengthening the national dialogue for necessary investment. And just to say that Serbia is not only one country or only one transition country struggling with coping with the financing of necessary measures to improve the quality. The recently published report on the European Court of Auditors look at 4 member states, Hungary, Slovakia, Austria. There were 4 countries which were heavily criticized for not proper investment in the measures. Of course, there was a sort of misunderstanding, a misconception that within the first river basin management plan you can reach the good ecological status from, for example, chemical perspective. But still, this is also some sort of memento for other transition countries to look at a very smart type of investment, not to slip in the, let's say, way to do some very easygoing or easier investments to really to fight with partners in sectors at national level with European Commission for the best and most efficient projects. This is a challenge and this is the lessons we learned from this report. I think I don't need to repeat all about these funding instruments, but this also is related to the indebtedness of the countries, several times mentioned here. But I think there are still opportunities in the negotiation process to look at the mixture of internal and external funding. This is about, as I said, whenever is strategy or plan put together, it never could come only from national resources or from outside sources. So mostly mixed, but at the end of the day, you understand that it's a national responsibility. And I said only the smart mix of these two would lead you forward, but for that, as I repeat myself, the only economic arguments will be used. Just an example about how the funding in member states is going on, and that's something also you can build in your compliance plan strategies with wastewater sector. That, for example, this huge wastewater plan in Budapest, which the cost was 60 million euro, 65% came from EU cohesion fund, a direct grant from EU. Then federal level Hungary put 20% and 15% was put in by the city of Budapest. So you still see that once become a member of the EU, you would have opportunity to tap the EU funds. Just very shortly, this morning I put together saying what type of lessons we can bring from transboundary cooperation. As we said, the transition of legal, institutional, and financial frameworks was in Danube River Basin and is inevitable. So the transition is there. We cannot fight it. We cannot turn the round turning back. We have to go with it. Unfortunately, institutional changes followed external inputs and/or pressures, and we've seen in many countries that in the negotiation process of EU, we were catching the horse by the tail. You are still in the negotiation process, so I think it's very important to provide a very strong and again resources, human resources, technical resources, laboratory, whatever resources, analysis to the government to show that it's not only investment which is needed to cope with all those directives. There should be institutional capacity in the country to prepare the project, to do a proper monitoring, to do proper analysis, reporting, prepare project. This is where many of the new member states, which are contracting parties to the ICPDR, are still struggling. So we took some advantage of this. For example, the water administration has been strengthened in many countries, but now we are learning it was not sufficient. So please be aware of the lessons of others. And several times mentioned, capacity is the fundamental factor for successful in transition, but not the only one. But without capacity, even with flood of the external money, country is not able to prepare reasonable project. So that's the problem which most of the countries in transition are struggling now. I'm speaking about new member states, not name and shame, but at least my home country is getting reports from the European Commission that the utilization of cohesion funds is at a very low level because the projects are not prepared in a proper form, because the whole processes are not handled properly. So, for example, the project has been approved, started, partly implemented, and when it comes to reimbursement from the cohesion fund, the European Commission found 17 or 77 flaws in the process, so doesn't foot the bill. And then all the funding is on the shoulders of the national government. So capacity is one of the key, but not the only one. And I'm just repeating what I said, sustainable financing is the key. A smart mix of external financing and national funds is necessary. And I'm speaking and national funds because the national funding is one of the key. I hope I fit within the time. I didn't bore you too much. And if you need more information about ICPDR, you can visit our webpage. Thank you very much.